So greetings everyone. This is our second video on array tracing. In this video we'll be covering a new concept. Whenever we declare an array, for example here we declared an array named myArray, and after declaration what we did, we on the right part we said new int 10, which means that we're creating 10 memory locations at a different address. Like here in the address one we're creating 10 memory locations to store the values, and here it's specified that it should include integer type values. So we can say in the variable or the identifier myArray what is stored. Here the location of the array is stored in the variable myArray. So whenever in the next line we declared another array, so what we did in this part, we basically declared the array which is B, but we didn't create any specific memory location for the array B. So it wasn't assigned a specific location right now. Here basically the array B points to nowhere, but the array myArray points to the location which is address 1. So after that, what we did, we're going to discuss the concept of sharing addresses between arrays. This is new about the specific tracing. Okay, then like the previous tracing, we're using two variables here, index 1 and index 2, which are declared or initialized with the value of 0. So we initialize them, both of them, with the value of 0. So then what do you see here? Like after that we updated the value of index 1 to 1. That means it had the value of 0, now updated it to 1. So what we did in that part, we said that B is equal to myArray. So this is an assignment operation. So we're basically assigning the address of myArray to the variable B. So now B points to the same address. It also points to address 1. So what we can see from the tracing now, address 1 is pointed by both of the variables myArray and B. So both of them now points to this specific address. So moving on to the next part, what we're doing here, like we're checking whether the value of index 1, which is 1 here, is less than 10 or not. Okay, yeah, 1 is less than 10, so we move on to this part. Like the previous code, here we have two loops. This is the outer loop here. It starts with this curly brace and ends with this curly brace, and we have an inner loop here. It starts with this curly brace and ends with this curly brace. This is the body of the inner loop, and the whole part, the whole chunk of the code is the part of the outer loop. So we're going to iterate these loops right now. First we check 1 is less than 10, so we move on to this part. We're updating the value of myArray at index 1, so it refers to this index. We're updating the value of index 1 as 1 plus 1. So what we get here, we get a value of 2. Now we're assigning the value of index 2 to 1. So we update the value of index 2 to 1. And we check whether the value of index 2 is less than index 1, like the previous tracing video, whether index 2 is less than index 1. No, it's not less, they're equal, so we don't get inside that loop. Since the condition is false, we don't get inside the loop, and we execute the statements just after the loop. So here we execute the statement which prints myArray at index 2. So we are printing myArray at index 2, which is basically 1. We print this. So after that what we do, we update the value of index 1. So update the value of index 1, it gets updated, we add 1 to it, so it becomes 1 plus 1, it becomes 2. So now what we're checking here, we're checking whether index 1 is less than 10. Yeah, 2 is less than 10, so we move on with this part of the code. So we update the value of myArray at index 1. So we update the value of myArray at index 1. What we do here, we add the value of current index 1 with 1. So that means we add 1 to the current value of index 1, and we get a resulting value of 3. After that we assign the value 1 to the variable index 2. So assign the value 1 to the variable index 2. In that case, the previous value of index 2 was also 1, so there is no changes like the previous tracing problem. So now we're moving on to this part of the code, whether the value of index 2 is less than the value of index 1. Yeah, 1 is less than 2, so we move on with this part of the inner loop. So what we see here, we're updating the value of my array at index 1. In this case, we're updating this value. Okay, so we did here, here's the tricky part, we did here the array B, which refers to the same array as my array, because both of them holds the same address, which is address 1 here. So we did here index 2 minus 1, which refers to the previous index of index 2. So that means index 2 refers to 1, here it refers to the previous index. So what was the value of the previous index? It was 0. We add my array of the and the current value at index 2, so that means current value of index 2, which is 2 in that case. So we add this and we subtract the value of index 1, and we subtract the value of index 1, which is 2 in that case. So what we get here, we get a value of 0. So we update the value of index 2 and we increase it by 1, so it gets updated to 2. And now we check whether index 2 is less than index 1. No, both of them are 2, so we move out of the loop and we execute the statement after the loop. So what does the statement do? It prints the value of my array at index 2. So it prints the value of my array at index 2. So it prints the value of 0 in that case. And now we're updating the value of index 1 to 3, because it get incremented by 1. Now we again iterate the loop. So now we check whether 3 is less than 10. Yeah, the value of index 1 is less than 10, so we move on with the part of the outer loop. So update the value of my array at index 1. In that case, index 1 refers to this specific index. So what we do here, we add 1 to the value of index 1. So we add 1 to the current value of index 1. So it gets updated to 4 here. So after updating this, we do another assignment statement. So we update the value of index 2 to 1 in that case. So now we're checking whether the value of index 2 is less than the value of index 1. Yeah, it's less than 1, is obviously less than 3, so we move on this to this part and we're updating the value of my array at index 1. So updating the value in this one. So what we do here, we add the value of B at the previous index of index 2. Okay, what's index 2 referring to? Index 2 is referring to this index, so we add the value of the previous index of index 2. We add this value with the value which is at the current index of index 2. So current index, this one refers to this index. We add 2 here and we subtract the current value of index 1, the current value of index 1. So we get a -1. So I'm removing all of it. So now, so what we do now, we update the value of index 2 and we add 1 to it, we get 2. And now we check again in the inner loop whether the value of index 2 is less than the value of index 1. Yeah, 2 is less than 3, so moving on to this part of the code. So we update the value of my array at index 1, which refers to, in that case, this specific index. So what we're doing here, we're adding the value of B at the previous index of index 2. So index 2 refers to this index, so we're adding the previous value of index 2. In that case, we're referring to this index. Adding this index here with the value of my array at index 2, with the value of my array at index 2, which is 0. So, and then we subtract the current value of index 1, which is 3 in that case, so we minus 3, we get 2 minus 3. What's the resulting value here? We get a -1. This is what we get. So after this part, we update the value of index 2 we add 1 to it. So we add 1 to it, it gets updated to 3. With it, we check index 2 is less than index 1. No, it's obviously not less than index 1, so we move out of the code and we move on to the rest of the code. So it prints the value of my array at index 2. So it prints the value of my array at index 2. In that case, it prints -1. So after being done with it, we're updating the value of index 1, we're adding 1 to it, we're incrementing it. So we update this one to 4. So now we're checking whether the value of index 1 is less than 10. Yeah, 4 is less than 10. So moving on to the body of the outer loop. So we're updating the value of my array at index 1. So we're updating the value of my array at index 1, which refers to this index. So what we do here, how to update the value, we add 1 to the current value of index 1. So we add 1 to 4. So the resulting value is 5 in that case. And now we assign the value 1 to index 2. So we assign the value 1 to index 2. So now we're checking whether the value of index 2 is less than the value of index 1. Yeah, this is less than this one, so we move on to the inner part of the code. We update the value of my array at index 1. Index 1, that means it refers to this specific index. So we're adding the value of b at the previous index of index 2. So since we're subtracting 1 from index 2, so that means the value of index 2 is 1, so we are subtracting 1 from it, so we get the value at this index, index 0. So what we're doing here, we're adding the value of b at the previous index of index 2, which is 0, and we're adding the value of b or my array at index 2. So we're adding the value of 2 to it, the specific index, and we're subtracting the value of index 1. We're subtracting 4, we get a -2 in that case. So far this is the updated value, so we keep it. Then what we do, we repeat this step, we update index 2, we increment it, and it gets updated to 2, and we check again whether the value of index 2 is less than the value of index 1. Yeah, 2 is less than 4, so going on with the same code, we're doing the same thing, my array at index 1. So it refers to this index, what we're currently working on, and we're updating the value of b at the previous index of index 2. So this is index 2 referring to right now. So we add the value of previous index of index 2, so we add the value of 2 plus the current index at index 2, which is 0, and we're subtracting 4, which is the value of index 1, and we get 2 minus 4, we get a -2. So we're clearing all of it for better visualization purpose. So now again, so what we do here, we update the value of index 2, it gets incremented, and now we check whether the value of index 2 is less than index 1. Yeah, 3 is less than 4, so the loop will be iterated once again. So we move on to this part, we update the value of my array at index 1, which is the currently working index, and we add the value of b at the previous index of index 2. So now index 2 is referring to 3, so that means this index. So we are adding the value of the previous index of index 2. So we are adding the value at the previous index of index 2 to the value at the current index of index 2, which is -1, and then again we subtract the value of index 1, which is 4 in that case. So 0 minus 1 minus 4, so what we get here, we get a -5. Okay, so we subtract all of it, so this is the final value at index 1. Okay, at this index. So we add index 2, we add 1 to it, so it gets updated, it gets incremented, so it becomes 4. So since 4 is equal to 4, both of them are equal, we just break out of the loop, we execute the rest of the statements. In that case, it prints the value of my array at index 2. So it prints my array, this one, at index 2, which is this specific index. So we print the value of it. It is -5. So, and then again we update the value of index 1. We update it and it gets incremented to 5. So we're done with this iteration. So now it checks whether the value of index 1 is less than 10. Yeah, it's less than 10. So moving on to this part, we're updating the value of my array at index 1, which refers to this index. So what we do here, we increment 1 to index 1. So index 1, added 1 with it, the updated value is 6 for now. So what we do here, we initialize the value of index 2 to 1. This is not initialization to be specific, this is just assignment operation. So we say initialization for the very first time when we assign a value to the variable. So now we're updating the value, we're assigning the value of 1 to index 2. So now we're checking whether index 2 is less than index 1. Yeah, it's less than index 1. So moving on to this part, my array at index 1, my array at index 1. So this refers to this index that we're currently working on. We add the value of b at index 2 minus 1. So let's see, what's the value of index 2? It's 1. So we're adding the value of b at index 2 minus 1. That means we're adding the value of b at 0. So we add 0 to the current value at index 2, so which is in that case 2, and we subtract the value of 5. So what we get here, we get a -3. So we cleared the rest of the part, and so now what we do here, we increment index 2 and we get the value of 2. We check whether 2 is less than 5. Yeah, 2 is less than 5. So moving on to the inner part of the while loop. So this is, we're again updating the value at index 1. So we're adding the value of b at the previous value of index 2. B, now index 2 refers to this one, so we're adding b at the previous value of index 2, which in that case is 2. We're adding with the value of my array at the current index of index 2, which is 0, and we're subtracting index 1. That means we're subtracting the value of index 1. 2 minus 5. So what we get here, we get a -3. So again, clearing all of it. So what we do now, so we update index 2 to 3, and we check again whether 3 is less than 5. Yeah, 3 is less than 5. So again, we're assigning value to the my array at index 1, the working index. So what we do here, we add the value of b at the previous index of index 2. In that case, index 2 is 3. So we are adding b at the previous index of index 2, which is 0, plus the value at the current index of index 2, which in that case is -1, and we subtract what from it? We're subtracting the current value of index 1, 5. So -1 minus 5. So what we get here, we get a -6 here. So once we get the value of -6, I'm clearing all of it. So this is the updated value of my array at index 1. So we're incrementing the value of index 2. It gets updated to 4. And now what we do now, whether 4 is less than 5. Yeah, this is most probably the last iteration for 5. So what we check, so my array at index 1, that means this index, the current working index, we're updating the value, we're adding the value of b at index 2 minus 1, the index 2 minus 1, so basically this index. So -1 is added to the value of my array at index 2, that is my array at this index, index 4, which is -5. -1 minus 5, and we're subtracting the value of index 1, which is 5 here. So that means we get -1 minus 5, which is -6, and we're adding -5 to it. So we get updated value of negative 11. So we're checking the rest of the table. So we're done with negative 11. So moving on to this part. Okay, so what it does, it increments the value of index 2. It gets updated to 5, and now we check whether 5 is less than 5. So the condition becomes false since they're equal, so we get out of the loop and we move on to the rest of the code. So we print line my array at index 2. So we print the value of my array at index 2, which is the fifth index. So we print negative 11 to the console, and then we update the value of index 1 to 6. So I've shown you iterations for up to index 6, so I hope you can do the rest of the part by yourselves. So try this at home, and if you face any kind of difficulties, just let me know in the comment section.